I'm here to talk about manufacturing and the connection with the mining sector, and more in particular some of the initiatives that Multotec are involved with, and how we are using that as proactive examples into the rest of our manufacturing circle membership base. Because we know that we are sitting in an economy where we are in the process of deindustrializing. Manufacturing is losing jobs. Part of that has a connection to what is happening in the mining sector. But we're not here to lament the situation. We know where the challenges are, but more importantly, we need to identify proactive opportunities. So what I'm going to do is just give you a little bit of a broad background on manufacturing circle and what we are talking to on this map to a million, which I think, especially in times now where we see economically, we're looking at, we're sitting in a recession, you might think, what on earth is manufacturing circle on about with this map to a million jobs? It sounds very aspirational and possibly a little bit crazy. But quite frankly, if we don't have aspirational goals, we have to have something to work towards. And I'll unpack it a little bit as to why we think we can get there, and what we can do with the link between mining and manufacturing to support that. So just manufacturing circle. Multotec, as I've mentioned, is a member. We function as the voice for the manufacturing sector. Manufacturing is quite diverse as far as the various subsectors go and where the different pressure points are. And as a result, there's a myriad of different manufacturing-related associations, and all quite importantly so, dealing with very specific issues that affect certain industries, such as a waste management plan or environmental impact studies that affect a certain industry. But what the manufacturing circle does is talk for the industry as a whole. Manufacturing is incredibly important for our economy and for growth, especially in a South African economy where we've got such high unemployment rates. We're definitely not going to create opportunities and growth in financial services and retail sector alone. We've got to make stuff. That is the bottom line. And if we make stuff, and you'll know in Multotec, in your own value chains, you make something, you've got to transport it, you've got to package it, you've got to service it. There's absolutely no way as South Africa we can afford to become a wasteland of imports. So the manufacturing circle has members from different subsectors, and Multotec, very importantly and interestingly, a manufacturing company but supplying into the mining sector. But we represent all various subsectors. We've got metals and fabrication, pharma care, agro-processing, etc. So we talk for the industry as a whole. And quite frankly, in a lot of the presentations and when we talk to, economic ministries, there's a lot that's always said on behalf of financial services and retail, but there's not a strong enough voice for manufacturing. And this is more of an issue because we're in the process of our manufacturing sector is starting to decline. We're in this process of deindustrialization, and we can't afford that. And there are many reasons, and we all know these reasons. And perhaps in this particular context, the threat of subsidized imports from China, for example. Post-1994, from an economic theory, the idea was South Africa had operated in quite a protected environment as a result of sanctions. So we had a very strong manufacturing sector. Then after 1994, the theory was to open up our barriers to trade, the fittest would survive. But what happened in retrospect is at the same time China was on its exponential growth path, and it had heavy subsidies. So for various reasons, our manufacturing sector started declining, and one of those was we lost some industry to cheaper imports and subsidized imports from China. And then also, the relationship between manufacturing and mining, because a lot of the manufacturing sector supplies into the mining sector. So as the mining sector has had its ups and downs, we've seen that impact on manufacturing as well. And why do we note that this is such a critical issue? If you have a look at what's happened to the manufacturing sector and the decline, we see the close relationship of the decline in jobs. And that we absolutely, we cannot afford. This is also quite interesting. If anyone's representing the mining sector specifically, they might not quite agree with our positioning. The point that we're making is that there is a very close relationship between manufacturing and mining. But if one looks at the various subsidies in terms of what is provided to the mining sector, it's quite supportive, whereas manufacturing sector is less so, and we do have quite high multipliers in the manufacturing sector. So it's not saying manufacturing in favor of mining, but it's saying manufacturing, we're talking about manufacturing in relating to mining and how we can grow the two and where we see the linkages between the two. And what we're really talking about is, at the moment, we're in this vicious cycle of deindustrialization, where our manufacturing plants in general are not operating at full production capacity. And then what happens is that we have job layoffs, we have less consumer demand, and so the downward spiral continues. But we're not here, we hear enough lamenting. And what we're talking about is, what is it that we can do to change the cycle and get to what we call the virtuous cycle of demand-led growth? What is it that we can do to get our manufacturing companies up to full production capacity, first and foremost? That then creates a positive spin-off in terms of extra growth, extra investment, and hopefully extra jobs. We're not naive. There's also the scenario of jobless growth and automation and mechanization, and that we do need to be mindful of. But at a base case, we still need a human element. We still need to make things. We still need to problem solve, and we need to be quite creative in identifying the opportunities. That extra skills and training, for example, are required in the manufacturing sector, so that there are still jobs required in the manufacturing sector, but in some cases, different types of training. So what we're talking about is, how do we grow this, or how do we kick this virtuous demand cycle into place? And what we're saying as the manufacturing circle is that we fundamentally need demand-side interventions. Because if one dumbs it down and unpacks it, if we don't have sufficient demand, manufacturers are not going to invest and grow. You can't manufacture more product if there's no demand for it. So how, in a tangible way, do we look at kickstarting and growing demand? And what I enjoy very much about the manufacturing circle's position and manufacturing and engineering in general is that there are very tangible, concrete things that we can do. And I will close off by talking to what Multotec is doing in the context of the supporting the manufacturing circle and vice versa in these demand-side interventions. So what is it that we can do? First of all, we need to look at what is our local demand in South Africa and how can we grow that. At the moment, and we know, and I'm mindful of making comparison to the US, but in some instances, this very strong support of making local and buying local. Provided that we're dealing with correct quality and price competitiveness, there's a lot of opportunity to see where is it that we can support local manufacture and production. And there are two legs to that. What is government doing in terms of procuring locally, and what is private industry doing? Government, and as the manufacturing circle, we're involved in quite a lot of these debates and summits with governments, and government will often say there's the process of designation that's been put in place, where essentially government commits to buying locally manufactured products from certain sectors or subsectors. In some areas it hasn't worked particularly well, but in other areas, transformers, for example, certain categories of transformers have been designated. So if any government department or a state-owned enterprise is going to buy transformers, by law, these are supposed to be from a locally manufactured product or supplier. So that is government's effort to kickstart, increasing demand, because we all know manufacturing is about economies of scale. And the one pushback we get often from government is, well, what is the private sector and what is industry doing in that regard? And that is where Multotec, in our view, has taken a very proactive and positive stance in identifying what is local content. How do we, and the devil is always in the detail, because it's all very well to say local content, but how is that verified? What is the quantum of local content? And if in Multotec's case, supplying to the mining sector, you've got your various mining houses who have a multitude of different categories of products that they're procuring. It's not necessarily always aligned. And how do we get that coordination going, being mindful of a whole pile of regulatory and legislative issues as well, like competition, commission, etc. But how do we work in a way so that we understand what is the overall demand for a certain product, how can we supply that, and how can we verify the local content? So on that basis, the manufacturing circle sees the collaboration with Multotec as very positive, in that Thomas Holtz, the CEO, informed us of the comments that have been called for in Mining Charter 3, notwithstanding the equity and land issues, which we'll stay clear of, but the provisions for local content and commitment to that. And that is actually a proactive opportunity where we could look to say, well, how is it that we can actually access this as an opportunity? So as the manufacturing circle, we've put in a position on behalf of manufacturing, and it's linked to the mining sector, and that we support the intention. And then, as always, we need to look at the detail. How, for example, do empowerment definitions linked to the mining charter and the manufacturing charter? We need coordination and alignment between the two, and that's something we always talk about in the manufacturing circle, the importance of policy coordination and alignment, so that different departments are not talking to separate things. And then also, the verification of this local content. That's going to take capacity requirements as to who's going to verify this and how is it going to be done, and also pragmatic steps as to how do we be smart about identifying what this local content is. Because on the one extreme, one could sort of look at a company level. On the other extreme, one could look at a product level, but there are thousands of products. Or is there perhaps a middle ground where we can look at value chains or product families? So those are the kind of things, and very practical things, on the increasing local aggregates demand. And we're working across the various manufacturing subsectors, but a very, very nice example in terms of what Multotec is doing, and let's say showing a proactive and a leadership role in that regard. There's also imports substitution, and I think in terms of World Trade Organization, they don't like the word substitution, it's import replacement. So again, in terms of the mining houses and what is being bought, we need to quantify, what are those products and what is it that could theoretically be manufactured locally. Again, as the manufacturing circle, we are participating, we're supporting Proudly South African. They've undertaken an exercise to have a look at what are the top 100 imports over the last 3 years in terms of value and volume, and where are there opportunities for potential localization. We can't be naive. We can't localize everything. We're part of a global economy, and we're mindful that in some cases it might be cheaper to import a certain component that goes into a final product. But if there's an opportunity for a value chain to say, well, there could be sufficient demand across a range of users, let's look at perhaps, or moving up the value chain. Take transformers again, for example. So through this process, and we're in engagement right now, and I'm going to be engaging with Multotec and anybody else who is interested. We've identified out of those top 100, where are the 50 potential items, because obviously oil, we can't, but where are those top 50 opportunities for potential localization? What categories do they fit in as far as value chains are concerned? And how can we take the next steps to identify tangible products? And then lastly, and this is why it's so good to be talking on a Multotec platform, because I would advocate as a manufacturing circle member, Multotec really ticks all those boxes as far as enhancing export competitiveness is concerned. And there we've got an example of a company that is also looking at export-led growth. And that's really the poster child of how growth of a manufacturing company in South Africa can be seen, to get sufficient domestic demand and economies of scale to establish a base, and then once we've saturated or almost saturated that market, what are the opportunities for growth and export-led growth? So those are really the key message. That's the key message that we put out there often. How is it that we can look at stimulating demand-side interventions? Because without that, we're really not going to achieve much. But on the same side, we also, and this is why manufacturing is so complex but so important, and it needs such a high level of detail and understanding, because there's also the supply side measures. So in order to be competitive in the export markets, we need to have competitive input costs, and we know what we're talking about when we look at energy there, for example. What is our fiscal policy doing as far as taxes and incentives are concerned? What are we looking at from a labor point of view? What are we looking at from a skills point of view? So those are also aspects that we need to consider concurrently, and we're involved in a couple of quite interesting proactive projects in that regard. So that really is, I'd say, a summary of what, from the manufacturing circle, we're looking to promote. At the one hand, it's quite strategic. We speak to, the various ministers, and we try to get coordination and collaboration and alignment where possible. We continue to beat the drum of importance of collaboration and consistency between departments. But on the other hand, we also like to talk to specific company examples of where a company such as Multotec has been very proactive in taking the opportunity to say, well, what is it that we can do as a company, as a proactive example, and how we can lead by example. So I'm going to end there. I've got some further information if you'd like, and I'm not sure if anybody's got any comments, or you're welcome to also just come and have a chat with me afterwards, because essentially sometimes look, we have to have manufacturing in this country. The link to mining is very important, and quite frankly, there are very tangible things that can be done, even if it means at a consumer level, to start being able to make a proactive choice, assuming one can, to choose something that's manufactured here as opposed to overseas. Some of our maxims, we say we need as many manufacturing activists as we can have in this country. I would consider myself one of them. Have to be honest, sometimes I have my difficult and challenging days, but I think if we've got a couple of people that put our heads together, there's actually a huge amount that can be done and a lot of opportunities at our disposal. Thank you very much.